Hello friends, Josie here. Welcome back to another Learning Lab. This video is going to be all about coloured pencils in all their wonderful variants of glory. Apart from watercolour, I think coloured pencils is probably my second favourite love. I just love the texture and the layering and just that whole process of sitting and quietly layering down, and it's just awfully therapeutic for me and I just love it. I put a poll on the Facebook group just to gauge if you guys would prefer, when I get to the illustration portion of these videos, if you prefer them in real time or in a time-lapse format. To date, most of them have been a time-lapse format. And it was a little bit of a mixed bag in the voting, but mostly people would prefer them in real time, which obviously would make the videos a lot longer. So for this edition of Lab, this one is going to be in real time, but I will most certainly mix them up and do a version of each. So we have some that are longer and some that are a bit shorter as we go. So let's dive into coloured pencils and get started, shall we? So how do we navigate this crazy world of coloured pencils with the variety and the range at our disposal these days? I would divide them into two main categories. So the first being your soft core pencils. So the pigment holding these together is a wax or an oil binder. And the types of pencils I'm talking about are your Prismacolor, your Polychromos and your Caran d'Ache Pablo. So these I would mainly use as that last layer because you're dealing with wax and oil binder, so it's difficult to come back over and add extra watercolour and that sort of thing. So I do reserve these for that last layer. The second category is your water-soluble coloured pencils. So the pigment holding these together is a water-soluble binder, which obviously means that you can use them like watercolour. So obviously you guys know at the moment I'm loving the Supracolor Soft by Caran d'Ache, but you also have things like Albrecht Dürer, and in the lower range your Prima watercolour range. So obviously less cost equals less pigment, so I would, if at all possible, recommend getting a smaller set in a higher range brand. So selecting a few different colours in maybe a Caran d'Ache Supracolor Soft for your watercolour pencils, rather than going out and purchasing a cheaper set. As I'll show you a bit later, I do have the Prima watercolour pencils, and just the difference in quality is quite significant. So yeah, so if at all possible, I would definitely recommend getting a smaller, higher end set rather than a cheaper, larger set. So what I would deem as the third category would be Inktense pencils. So these are more an inked base colour pencil. I'm not going to talk about these in this video. This is something that we'll cover in a future lesson if you guys are interested. So let's get on to exploring these pencils in some more detail. So other things you need to get going with your coloured pencils. Paper, I would suggest a good weight somewhere in the 200 to 300 GSM range. I mostly, almost exclusively these days, use Fabriano Artistico in the hot press in 200 GSM. So most of my journals are filled with this paper. I cut it down into signatures and use it that way. I just prefer the hot press because it's smoother. Something in the cold press with a bit more tooth, I just find it a little bit frustrating to get the pencil and get all those layers in there. I prefer it to be sort of smooth with a little bit of texture, so the hot press just works for me to get that type of effect with the coloured pencils. The other note with cold press as well, you would be using more pigment to get it down and push it down into those in between the tooths to get those layers. So that's probably something to consider if you're wanting to use cold press. You more than likely would be using more of your pencil to get the layers down there. So other things that you will need is a pencil sharpener, obviously. The Prismacolor is something that I love, and most recently I'm using one from Faber-Castell that has a colour and a normal coloured pencil in it. I'm just finding with this one in particular I'm having to turn less and therefore using more of my pencil up. I find sometimes, or more recently, this one is breaking, but it might be that the blades are blunting too. So something like this that's a loose pencil sharpener I'm finding is working much better for me, and I'm using less pencil. So other things that I'm going to explore with you in this video is Gamsol, which is a mineral spirit that is odorless that you can use to create a less textured and smooth effect on your coloured pencil. And obviously a white Posca for that final layer. Okay, so let's pen test some of these coloured pencils and show you how the different varieties work. So these ones here in the soft core range are probably the ones that I refer to most for most illustrations. So in the skin tone category, from Prismacolor, probably these three in particular. So the Grade Lavender, which is a really soft lavender-like effect. The Light Peach, and the Seashell Pink. The Seashell Pink in particular is lovely blended with greys as well. And also from Prismacolor, they're 10% warm grey. Then from Polychromos, I have the Light Flesh, the Cinnamon, and the Medium Flesh. From Caran d'Ache, I love these two in particular because they're just a little bit more unique, particularly this one, the brownish beige. It's almost a sepia colour. Just really lovely for those shadows, and they're beige. So even in that your high-end versus your medium end pencils, you can see the difference in the pigment and the darkness that's coming down there as well. So other ones from Caran d'Ache as well, the Luminance. So this is Brown Ochre. French Grey 10%, and Raw Umber. And then these random Derwent ones, I'm not sure how long I've had them or what type of packaging they come in, but they just say Derwent drawing on them. They do have quite some unique colours in the set as well, sort of in those grey blues and grey green type versions. So I've got here Chinese White, Light Sienna, and Solway Blue. I find the white in particular I use for most illustrations because they are highly waxy compared to some of these others. So they're really good for that last final highlight and final detail work. So you can see they're really, really waxy and quite a gorgeous coloured pencil. So then in your watercolour pencils, I would highly suggest swatching them out when you're picking varied colours for an illustration, because the difference between what it looks on the barrel to what it looks down dry to what it looks wet there's an incredible difference. So that's definitely a tip that I suggest that you do before you go straight in with one that you think, oh yep, that's the right colour, and you put it down and it'll be completely different. So we've got so these are all my Caran d'Ache ones. So creamy and so smooth, they're just gorgeous. So this one is Granite Rose, and this one is Salmon. So the thing with the Caran d'Ache as well, these match perfectly in number and colour name to the Neo colours as well. So if you wanted to use both together in an illustration, they match up perfectly. So I'll just show you on the barrel there versus what they look like down on paper. Especially in these, it's more significant. They don't have a lot of soft colours, so that's been something that I've found a difficulty with the style of my work as well. Finding a range of ones to use has been difficult. So beautiful. I love the effect that it sort of leaves behind that slight layer of that first layer. It's really pretty. So these is the Prima range of watercolour pencils, not as pigmented. But certainly quite a huge range in the sort of skin tone variety. I find after it dries, it doesn't have that lovely textural effect that the Caran d'Ache have. It's much more muted, but just, yeah, just the effect isn't quite there as these are for me. Storage for our gorgeous coloured pencils is obviously important too, because these guys are precious and expensive and we don't want them dropped or damaged in any way. So these guys here that I've shown you in the video are part of the ones that I use day in, day out. So they are stored in my gorgeous custom pen roll, which you guys have seen me loving on a lot lately. So I just have my favourite blues and greens, greys and sand colours and skin colours, all in the soft core pencils. They get stored in that for my everyday use. But then I also have these two of these random tin, I think they're originally table ornaments. I'll put an insert of some footage of them here. They were sort of in the throw-out bin at my local homewares. They were something that she just couldn't sell, but if you're creative, I think the minute you saw them, you knew exactly what they need to be used for. They have 8 tins that come in and out, and they're the pretty much the exact size for coloured pencils. Yeah, and they just work perfectly. So if you can get your hands on something similar to that, they work really well for storing your coloured pencils. So laying down your soft core pencils, there are 4 main categories that people use to do this. So this, like your handwriting, one style will become natural and more comfortable to you over time. So I would suggest trying all the different styles and see what's the most comfortable to you. So the first is unidirectional hatching, which is just backwards and forwards in that type of a motion. This is the most comfortable for me and what I use most often. So you have cross hatching, which is backwards and forwards, and then backwards and forwards in the opposite direction. You have even circular, which is round and round in circles. Or you have wild circular, which if you're a bit OCD like me, I just can't even deal with that. So as I said, one of these will become more natural. I would just suggest trying them all and see what you think. You could also change it up and use a few of them and create a bit of texture and different variety in your work. So the other thing that I do is, as you've seen as I've laid these out, is as I'm getting ready to use either the soft core or the watercolour pencils on an illustration, I will go through my set and my stash and lay them out in colour stories. So this is just something that just started with me and that I've always done. It's really useful to if you're working on a piece over time, you have them set out and you know exactly which ones you're using. You're not referring back to a whole stack, and getting mixed up and messed up if you're working over it more than one day. So that I'd just lay them out in their stories, so they're pinks or their skin colours or their greys, and just work and put them back into those colour stories so I know where I'm at. Okay, so the last little thing I want to show you before we move on to putting this all into practice is Gamsol. So this is an odorless mineral spirit that you would use to smooth out and blend this so it's not as textural and a little bit more finished if that's the look that you're looking for. So I would suggest using this in a well ventilated area. It does say it's odorless, but there is a little bit of a smell to it, and also pick a brush that's exclusive for this as well, so you're not ruining your brushes. And I'm just blending it all out. And here it is all dry. You may have noticed in the example that as it's drying it gets this yellow ring. Don't panic, that does go away once it's dry. So to look at, it is still textural, but to touch it's very, very smooth and blended. So this is, I just wanted to include this in the video to give you a range of ideas and things to try, but currently this isn't really something that I do use. I just prefer the textural look and feel in my current process. So at this point you're probably thinking, well, that is a heap of really detailed information, Jo, and we are all colour theory nerds, so we love our detail and our information, but how do I use this in a practical sense? So the first step that I would use is to do an underpainting, which is basically a less detailed version of my final illustration, but I'm basically just going in with watercolour in a loose, playful motion, just playing with my mixes and getting down some colour as a base. Then the second thing I do is to go into a second layer with my watercolour pencil, and that develops that and builds on that shadow and depth and texture. I do this over the watercolour because I just prefer the look of it rather than going down dry with watercolour pencils with not having that base of watercolour underneath. And then the final stage would be working in my soft core pencils. I'm finding the more and more that I use these watercolour pencils, I'm having to do less with the soft core pencils. These guys are becoming quite the workhorse and getting that detail down and texture down, and I'm finding I'm not having to use the soft core as much and for as long to build up that detail. So with the soft core pencils, I do it in a less is more approach, so it's more a conservative approach. So starting with a little bit of the dark and moving into the light. So how I would use the coloured pencils, so the soft core coloured pencils in that final layer, is to start with the lightest one in my little colour story that I'm planning to use, and just going backwards and forwards in that unidirectional motion and popping down some colour, so I'm not pressing really, really hard. It's fairly light type of emotion. Then taking the next darkest and popping him down, and then taking that Derwent pencil that I use for my highlights and just sort of going over softly to blend that all out. And then I would go back into more a shadow colour and the darkest of the soft core pencils I'm wanting to use, and going back over that same area. Darker again. And then going back to the white and blending it again out again, and basically just going round and round in that type of emotion till I'm happy with that final layer of soft core pencil, happy with the texture and detail, and yeah, so you could literally spend hours doing this step with the coloured pencil because you get quite particular about it, but as I said, definitely using the watercolour pencil has reduced that significantly. So the next clips of this will be a real-time video of this guy coming to life in all those stages like I've just explained. So the underpainting water layer, then the coloured pencil layer, then the soft core layer. So once again, patrons, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm truly blessed and thankful every day for you guys' love and support, and I really hope you enjoy this latest edition in our lab. See you next time.